All right, I think we got that. All right. Hi there, folks. Looks like we got this working. So we're on a couple minutes early here, but that's all right. For those of you who show up a little bit early, you get a kind of a neat sneak peek of some of the other stuff we have in the museum. See behind me here, I've got Esther. We're going to talk about her later. First, I want to show you guys some really neat fossils. We usually kind of hide away in the back room. So these, get these to focus here. These are, there we go, very ancient plant leaves. They're from a type of plant called a fern, a tree fern. And they still exist today. You can go to the greenhouse and hardware store and get tree fern or potted ferns, usually king ferns, which are, come on camera, there you go, are closely related to these. These are very old. If I remember right, these are about 120 million years old. And they're really kind of neat fossils because so often we focus on big things like Esther here. And well, the plants get missed. You know, we look at the dinosaurs or the Ice Age giants, which we're going to start talking about in just a minute here. But a lot of times folks forget there's a whole wealth of plants that are very, very important to every single one of those animals, both for cover and for food. Now, put those behind me so I don't knock them over. All right, so it looks like my alarm's beeping at me, so it's 1 o'clock here. I'd like to thank everybody for making it this afternoon. My name is Sean. I work for Colossal Fossils. And what I do for the museum is what we call experimental archaeology. So what I usually do is make replicas of different tools like this neat little Stone Age device. And then I take them out into the real world and I use them to learn more about how they worked, how they were made, why people did things in a certain way, that sort of thing. In a couple of weeks, we're going to actually be talking quite a bit about that. Today, we're talking about Ice Age giants. Now, the Ice Age is a really, really neat period in time because it encompasses a long period. Actually, the last 5 ice ages out of something like 14 took place just in the last 1 million years. And it seems like a long time, but a lot of the animals that we recognize as being, you know, things that like cavemen had to deal with, things like Esther behind me here, were around during the Ice Age. Our ancestors showed up during the Ice Ages. And we actually probably exist in our modern forms as a direct result of evolutionary and behavioral pressures that occurred during the Ice Age. But again, we're going to talk more about us in coming weeks. For right now, we're going to get back to the Ice Age. Now, an Ice Age is just a period in time where global temperature drops. We've got a lot of different theories about why that happens and the mechanics of how it works. Frankly, it's probably a very complicated thing. You know, the environment and the way all of the little bits and parts of it work together. It's kind of like the engine of a car. And if if you get into your car engine and you start turning on knobs and dials and twisting bolts and opening caps, it changes how the whole engine runs. And any number of things can do that in an environment. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, even the Earth actually wobbles a little bit as it spins. Think like a top. As it spins around, it kind of wobbles side to side. The Earth does that. The entire galaxy actually does that, the whole Milky Way galaxy. And so over time, you can get a couple of different wobbles, the galaxy wobble and the sun wobble and the Earth wobble all line up, and all of a sudden we're not getting as much heat from the sun and we have an ice age. You can have things like the wildfires out west that put tons and tons of particulate matter and smoke up into the atmosphere, can dim the sun and can cool things down. And if you get the right combination over the right period of time, you theoretically end up with an ice age. Now, the last ice age, what we call the LGM, the last glacial maximum, finished off about 12 to 14,000 years ago. So right about that time is when, those iconic ice age animals, the saber-toothed cats, the woolly mammoths, the stuff like that started to die off, to disappear. And right about that same time, our ancestors were developing new technologies, things to help us survive that where other animals didn't, things like the bow and arrow. Now, the Ice Age is particularly neat for me here in Wisconsin, and I imagine most everybody watching, because it happened right here. I mean, it was a global event, but the state of Wisconsin has direct effect from the last glacial maximum, from the Ice Age, where the glaciers came down and covered 3/4 of the state. The only area left was down in the southwestern corner of the state over by Iowa, what we call the driftless zone or driftless region. Up here in Wausau, the glaciers were miles thick, as much as 2 miles deep. That's about 10,000 feet of solid ice. They were so big and so heavy that they actually scraped all the dirt right down to the bedrock and pushed it way south. So the stones up here, the rocks up here, are actually different than some other parts of the state. Now, the other neat thing about the Ice Age, like I mentioned before, a lot of the things, including us, that we would recognize today evolved, they developed during this period of time. Many animals, many things that we even see today. So, for example, I imagine some of you, your parents are, or you at least have uncles, aunts, somebody, folks who are deer hunters. Modern deer actually appear during the Ice Ages. And some of them got massive. This is just this is a good sized deer for a modern white-tailed deer. But some of these deer during the Ice Age, they got bigger than a modern moose. In fact, some of their antlers were more than 10 feet across. They were so huge that they physically could not have gone into the forest because they couldn't fit their head between the trees. Now, right here in Wisconsin, we had other things that we would recognize too. Animals that we would mostly think of as being like out on the African savanna. We had things like antelope. We had camels, actually right here in southern Wisconsin and Iowa, Illinois, and this whole region south of the glaciers, camels. the giraffes' relatives were out here, types of antelope and deer. Don't believe we've found any giraffes out in the United States yet, but the relatives were around. Of course, things like we have today, moose, elk, different types of deer, mule deer, reindeer, caribou, all existed. And horses. Horses are kind of a neat animal. So this is a strange little fossil. If you found this, you wouldn't necessarily realize what it, get my camera here. There we go. We wouldn't necessarily realize what this is exactly, but it is a horse tooth. Now, this particular type of horse is called Eohippus. Now, Eohippus is a very early relative of modern horses. There you go. And it was about the size of a beagle, of a small dog. You know, it was maybe it's about that long and about that tall. They were pretty small animals. They lived in the forest. If you remember, a couple weeks back, we talked about Psittacosaurus and Protoceratops. Eohippus was the mammal, the horse equivalent of that. It started out as a small animal. It lived in the forest. And as the ice ages began to pick up a million and a half years ago, it changed the environment that these animals lived in. And it went from this dense, thick woodland where being small and short and able to sneak through the bushes and, you know, eat fallen fruits and leaves and stuff in the woods. Think like a tiny little deer. That was advantageous for a long time. But as the environment changed, as the grasslands started to appear, well, it was better to be a fast runner because there was nowhere to hide in the open grass. And it was better to be able to eat the grass because there was so much of it. It was a whole lot of food. And so over time, this little Eohippus evolved into a whole array of different species. Many of them we still have today. Now, wild horses, they usually look a little bit more like a donkey. A zebra is a wild horse. There's wild horses all over Asia, Mongolian steppes, and they were first domesticated in Europe. Now, what's interesting about the horse, today we have horses out west. If you watch a Western, you think, you know, horses and cowboys, right? But at the end of the last ice age, all of the North American horses went extinct. The surviving horses were all in Africa and Asia and Europe. And horses did not come back to the North American continent until something like the 1500s, when Spanish sailors, Spanish peoples from Europe brought domesticated horses over on sailing ships and reintroduced them to North America. Now today we have wild Mustangs out west. We actually have wild populations of horses in America again, but they're actually descended from European horses, not from North American horses. Other animals that we still have today that showed up during the Ice Age that you might recognize would be this really big, really heavy fella here. So this is a skull of a North American bison. Now, a bison is a big animal. We usually call them buffalo. And, you know, again, this is sort of one of those things we usually think of as like a Wild West kind of critter, right? You know, the Native Americans hunting them with bows and arrows, or cowboys with rifles going after these, you know, great herds of buffalo. But these are actually Ice Age animals. You ever watch videos of them, like National Geographic, where you see bison in Yellowstone Park, you can kind of see how they're adapted for the Ice Age. They have really thick, shaggy hair and fur. It looks like this. This is a patch of buffalo fur, of buffalo hide that was tanned the way the Native Americans used to do it. We'll talk about that in future weeks here. And some of the buffalo herds back then, and actually up until fairly recent history, they could be into the millions, just countless members in herds of these animals. There were descriptions of early travelers out west saying that the herds were so large they would stretch from horizon to horizon for 3 days. And they would leave swaths of torn up prairie that looked like trampled city roads. There were so many of them. Like I said, a bison is a large animal. A typical bison can be as tall as 11 feet at the shoulder, 11 feet long, nose to tail, 7 feet at the shoulder. So a good couple feet taller than I am. 11 feet would be a really big bison. They weigh up around 2,000 pounds, and they're actually really good runners, which is unusual for grazing animals like this. They can reach up to 30 miles an hour, and they can sustain a trot for a very long distance. Usually things like cows or horses, they can only run a little ways and then they got to stop because grass doesn't have a lot of energy in it. It's not like eating granola bars and going for a jog. They have to really, really work to get calories out of that grass. As you can see from their teeth here, they do a lot of chewing. A neat detail on our bison here before I put this big fella down is the eyes. Now, if you look at a bison on TV, or even if you go to the zoo, like the Henry Vilas Zoo in Madison has a really big shaggy buffalo. He's fun to watch. Their eyes look like they're set pretty much like ours, but that's because of the way the fur and the skin and the fat covers their face. Their eyes, and actually the eyes of a lot of herbivores like this, kind of stick out. And that's an adaptation for dealing with predators. It actually gives them a wider field of view. Not quite like snails where their eyes are way out here and you bump them and they pull them into their head. Nothing like that. But the eye sits, get the camera right, the eye sits right about here, and that lets them see kind of around their bulk. And they can't quite see straight in front of them, but they can see a huge area around them. And so it makes it really hard to sneak up on them. Also, bison are kind of grumpy animals. You can see that the flat spot on their head here is where they thump into things. I have seen videos of bison where they get annoyed at a car and they can push the front of a car around and they can actually hit it hard enough that it's like being in a car accident. So you don't want to walk up to a buffalo and try to pet them on the head or anything like that. A relative of bison and modern cows that's not around anymore, called the auroch, is a lot more like what we would think of as a modern cow. And actually, here in Wisconsin, all of our dairy cows are descendant from relatives of aurochs. Now, back in the Ice Age, there we go, put that big guy down. Back in the Ice Age, aurochs would have been behaving a lot more like bison than modern dairy cow. If you walked up to an auroch and tried to pet it on the head like you might somebody's cow, instead of it looking at you like, oh, hi, it would probably try to step on you or hit you with its head. If you're familiar with wildebeest, aurochs were shaped kind of like that, but chunkier, really heavily muscled. And our human ancestors actually hunted all of these animals that we've talked about so far. And they were pretty good at it. A little sneak peek at the future. This is something we'll be talking about in depth much more in coming weeks. But this is just a small portion of how you hunt a buffalo if you're only 5.5 feet tall and 150 pounds like myself, or yeah, a little more than 150 pounds, but I won't tell if you don't. Now, all of these animals, these camels, buffaloes, cows, horses, deer, goats, antelope, moose, all of these animals, we have versions of them today. We have their relatives today. We see them, we know what they are, and they're not really that strange to us. The Ice Age also had some really, really fascinating animals that we don't have today. Now, has everybody heard of an armadillo? Yeah. Armadillo is kind of a strange little mammal. They're not really furry. They're not very smart. They don't see very well, have a really good sense of smell. And if they get afraid, they roll up into a ball, like the little potato bugs, and they have really thick, tough skin all the way around, so they almost have a shell. It's kind of like if a rabbit was pretending really hard to be a turtle. Now, modern armadillos don't get very big. The biggest of them in South America are about the size of a dog, a small dog. Most of them in the Southwest are actually just a little bigger than rabbits. And excuse me, they eat mostly bugs and worms and grubs like that. They're very good diggers, and they're actually very good swimmers, which most people don't realize. Excuse me for a second. Now, back in the Ice Age in South America, for example, we had a type of armadillo, which I unfortunately don't have any fossils of yet, called a glyptodon. Now, glyptodon was a neat animal. Now, this was an armadillo that started walking out onto the plains and the prairies and the open grasslands in South America. And it started eating plants and grasses, really tough, fibrous stuff. And it got huge because, again, it takes a lot of grass to give you that energy. So things that live just on grass tend to get a little bigger so they can eat a little more so they can get that energy. Glyptodons got to be up to the size of a small car almost. They were 5-6 feet high, you know, a couple thousand pounds, big animals covered in a hard shell. And some of them even had a spiky club on their tail. They actually looked a lot like the dinosaur Ankylosaurus. And they were just really neat animals. If you ever get a chance, take a look at their skeletons or their even drawings of them. They're really weird animals. Now, up until Central America formed, North and South America were actually separated by open water, by ocean. And during that time, right alongside the glyptodons, we also had giant birds we call terror birds down in South America. When the two continents came together, believe it or not, cats from North America came down there and ate the birds. We would have thought that a cat would eat a bird, right? But when that meeting of continents happened, some of the things from South America came up here as well. One of those things that actually turned out to be a very successful animal is the giant ground sloth. We're really fortunate here at the museum just before COVID started up, and we had to kind of change the way we're doing things to this format here. We got some parts of a giant ground sloth. Just to start out here, most everybody knows what a sloth is, right? Sloths are kind of strange animals. They're sort of an off on their own group. And the reason we talked about armadillos is because, believe it or not, sloths and armadillos are related. They share a common ancestor. But sloths today, we think of them as really, really slow. You know, they hang upside down in their trees by their hands like this, and they sleep most of the day. They just kind of hang there, and every once in a while they crawl along the underside of the branch like that. Sometimes they go swimming and wander around and find a new tree. They've got really long arms, you know, big claws. They're hook shaped, and they're plant eaters. And sometimes they'll eat bugs or bird eggs or that sort of thing, but for the most part, they're plant eaters. And the adaptation that makes them so slow actually helps them eat poisonous plants. Their metabolism, their digestion is so slow and they're so low energy that if they eat a poisonous or a toxic plant, it actually, the poison breaks down before it can make them sick because it just takes so long for them to get it into their system. So it's a neat adaptation. Back during the Ice Age, a relative of the sloth called Megatherium, the giant ground sloth, was actually about the size of a cow. These were massive animals. We don't think they were quite as slow and sluggish as sloths are, but they could be a massive animal, actually as big as a modern rhino in some cases, almost 20 feet long with their tail, up to 4 tons, way too big to climb up into a tree and hang upside down. And like, this is just one claw. This is, compare it to my finger here, this is a pinky finger claw from a giant ground sloth. And they were actually pretty successful plant eaters, but they got, like I said, really big. Here we go. Now this is a skull of our giant ground sloth. And he's kind of got a funny looking face. It's a little derpy. But these animals had some really neat adaptations. So his eyes were right about here. He didn't have very big eyes. And his nose, on the other hand, was right here. He had a really big nose. And you can see now he doesn't have any front teeth. Now, I'm gonna, there we go. It's heavy. I'll hold it like that for a second. So I'm gonna guess that everybody watching this probably has at least a couple front teeth, right? Yeah. So the sloths here, they didn't have front teeth because they ate their food differently than we do. Now, if I want to take a bite of a sandwich, or you want to take a bite of a peanut butter cup or a potato chip, you pick it up and you take a bite. And those front teeth cut off a section of it that's small enough that you can chew it up and eat it without choking. The sloth here, he doesn't have those front teeth, but he's got really, really big, puffy lips. And we actually used to think they had a really long, flexible tongue, like a giraffe. And if you watch a giraffe eat, they don't bite stuff. They kind of do the frog thing where they stick their tongue out, they grab it with their tongue and pull it back into their mouth, and then they just start chewing. But the bone structure inside of the mouth here has actually kind of indicated to us that they probably didn't eat that way. But all of this texture, all of this shape up here means that they had really kind of long, flexible lips. So you can imagine them, instead of taking a bite, they just take their lips and go, and pull in their leaves and the grasses and stuff like that, and then just start chewing. And see if I can get the camera to show you. You can see inside the mouth, they don't have a lot of teeth, but they're really big. And these bones on the side, these bones on the side of the skull here, These are actually for jaw muscles. So they would have had big cheeks, big jowly cheeks, big lips, but a really strong bite. And they spent most of their day browsing, which is probably being kind of picky about the leaves and the plants they were eating, but they were chewing all the time, just like a cow, except a sloth. Put this sucker down because he's heavy. There we go. Now, on the subject of grazing, I'm going to guess that everybody here knows what an elephant is. Yeah. So during the Ice Age, elephants were actually far more widespread and successful animals than they are today. Now today, of course, some of the reason that elephants don't exist everywhere is unfortunately because of people. Humans have gotten very, very good at being predators, but during the Ice Age, elephants were widespread. They were all over North America, all over Asia and Europe and Africa, even down into South America. And actually, some of the largest elephant species ever to exist lived in South America. Now, in Wisconsin here, we had two different kinds of elephants, of furry, hairy, cold weather adapted elephants. The first one we're going to talk about is called a mastodon. Now, if you've ever heard of a place in Wisconsin called Boaz, I actually found a couple of mastodon there. It's over in the southwest corner of the state. Very pretty area, nice little town. And so they lived right here in the state of Wisconsin. Now this is one tooth. This is a chewing tooth, a molar, like one of your back teeth, for an American mastodon. You can see now this is a little big for me, right? Probably a little big for all of you guys. Our teeth, our chewing teeth, are about the size of a jelly bean. They're not very big, which, well, that should tell you how big a mastodon is, right? Now these animals, they were comparable in size to a modern elephant, to say like an African elephant, although they were actually more closely related to Asian elephants. They could be up to 9 feet tall, maybe even as heavy as 8 tons. They were kind of chunky elephants. They were covered in fur. They had long, almost straight tusks, and they lived, for the most part, in forests, in forested areas. And that's actually why these teeth are shaped like this. So these ridges and furrows in these teeth interlock with another tooth over top, like this. So as it chews, it just shreds up whatever it's eating. And we actually know a lot about what these animals were eating because we have found something called coprolite. And for those of you at home who don't know what coprolite is, it is fossilized poo. Yeah, believe it or not, there are actually scientists who get paid to study fossilized poo. Yeah. How'd you like that job? Now, of course, once it's fossilized, it doesn't smell anymore. It's turned to stone, and can actually use x-rays and microscopes, and you can learn what an animal was eating from that. And mastodons, they ate rough, coarse stuff. Things like tree bark, pine branches, pine cones, just really, really hard to chew stuff. So these teeth are like an ice age wood chipper. But something we found out not too long ago, just a couple years ago from these studies, is that mastodons really liked pumpkins. While mastodons were walking around during the Ice Age, there was a species of wild squash. It was a lot like a pumpkin or a gourd that we have today. And whenever these things came into season, the mastodons ate them like candy. Rind and seeds, gooey inside stuff, stems, everything. They just pick them up and the whole thing. Now, this next piece here is still a mastodon, but I'm going to have to back away from the camera and really lift. I'm getting my exercise in today. This is a mastodon's leg bone from the hip to the knee, called a femur. We're going to show you just how big we're talking about here. That is the upper leg bone. It is half as tall as I am, just the leg. On me, that's here to here. On a mastodon, can barely even fit it on the screen. Big animals. If it was standing next to me, its knee right here would be right about equal with my head. So that tall. And I'm going to put that back down because it's heavy. There we go. Now, a close relative of the mastodon, what we usually think of as one of those iconic Ice Age animals, is the woolly mammoth. Now, there's a few differences between woolly mammoths and mastodons that are really important differences. And it actually allowed them to live side by side in the same environment and not compete. They fell into what we call different niches. So this is a woolly mammoth tooth. A lot of people tell me it kind of looks like a little elephant, right? It's got this little root stem here, and it makes it look like it's a little. The mammoth tooth is shaped like a little mammoth. Now, if we look at the top of this, this is the chewing area on the tooth, and it looks completely different from our mastodon tooth, right? Get those on the camera. There we go. Now see, if the woolly mammoth opened its mouth and yawned, that is about how tall its teeth look. They look really, really short, even though all of this is down in the gum tissue and in the jaws. If the mastodon does the same, it's got these huge ridges. The gum line comes up to right about here. So their teeth look much bigger, even though they're about the same size. Because woolly mammoths were grazers. They were like cows. They ate mostly grass, sometimes other things. Like elephants are very, very good at changing their diet a little bit to meet what's available in their area. They have to eat a lot of food, sometimes up to half a ton of food a day. Now, that's not the only difference between woolly mammoths and mastodons. Woolly mammoths could get a little bit bigger. In future programs here, I'm going to introduce you to Herbie, which is a woolly mammoth from right here in Wisconsin. He's the largest found in North America. He was 16 feet tall. That is taller than a Tyrannosaurus Rex. But I mentioned mastodons had long, almost straight tusks. And we're going to show you a drawing, a picture rather, of the differences between the two face to face in a second here, but I want to show you this. So this is a woolly mammoth tusk. It looks like I'll have to step back here to show you the whole thing. There we go. This is a woolly mammoth tusk. And it's this kind of spirally shape, this almost corkscrew shape. Woolly mammoths had these long, curved, swept tusks like this for a very important reason. They were used to clear snow. Now, it'd be really hard for me to show you. There we go. Really hard for me to show you how that works with the big one on camera here. So I'll do a woolly mammoth impression. Now, how many of you help your parents shovel snow in the wintertime? You go out and grab your shovel and clear snow off of the sidewalk? Yeah, everybody? I hope so. Now, woolly mammoths, they had to eat a lot of food. Like I said, a half ton a day. They were 6, 7, 8 ton animals. Some of them, 10, 11 feet tall. They were huge animals. Takes a lot of food and a lot of grass to keep that animal running. They don't hibernate. They can't stop eating because the grass is covered in snow. So they'd take those big curvy tusks, they stick their face down in the snow, and they'd go like this. And that sweeping motion with those big curvy tusks would throw the snow out of the way. And then their trunk, their big long nose, like a modern elephant, it wasn't round like elephants are today. It was flattened like this. And so what that means is they could take that trunk and literally make a snowball. They could scoop any leftover snow out of the way and then pick up that grass with their trunk and eat it all winter long. If you went back in time, or if you were joined up with a group of cavemen and were hunting a woolly mammoth, you could actually follow behind the herd in winter like you're walking down a plowed street, because they'd clear that snow out behind them to eat the grass underneath. Now I drew this up for today so I could show you. This is the difference between a woolly mammoth and a mastodon. Now, this guy is our woolly mammoth. You can see he's got the big curvy tusks, and he's got this sort of lump on his head and his back. This is all muscle, and that helps him turn that head and swing those tusks back and forth. The mastodon here, on the other side, you can see he's almost flat across the top. He looks a lot more like a modern elephant. And the reason for that is because since he lives in the forest, he needs to be able to squeeze under tree branches sometimes. And his tusks have that longer, almost straightish shape to him, so that he can actually push aside plants and branches and stuff that are in the way. There we go. That are in the way while he's walking through the forest. He's got his tusks stick out in front like this. So as he's walking through and he gets in hits a tree branch or gets into something he doesn't want to let stop him, he just takes those tusks and just pushes it aside and keeps on walking, pushes his way through. Modern forest elephants in like Central Africa in the jungles, or in Asia and India, will actually make huge, almost tunnels through the forest, through the woods, where they travel on these same paths over and over, going from watering holes to places where there's food. So it's very likely that mastodon would have left similar trails through the forests. Now, we are a little more than halfway through our time here, and all we've talked about are all these plant eaters. Now, of course, what is a plant eater without a meat eater, right? The predators and prey, they interact with each other. They get big, so they're harder to eat. They grow tusks and horns and armor so that they're harder to catch. For mammals, just like for dinosaurs. Well, during the Ice Age, we had a lot of the same predators right here in Wisconsin that we have today, and some that we don't have anymore. Now, today we can find wolverines, bobcats, cougars, coyotes, foxes, wolves, even bears. During the Ice Age, we had cave lions, or well, American lions rather, which is like the European cave lion, but bigger, a couple 100 pounds bigger than a modern African lion. We had hyenas. We had bunches of different types of bears that we don't have today, or that don't live out here anymore. And so it was a predator's ball. If you were a Stone Age human walking around in Ice Age Wisconsin or Ice Age North America, you would want to make sure you had your spear, because not only were you on the menu, but there were a lot more predators than there are around today. So does anybody have a dog, pet dog at home? But a couple of you, right? Yeah. So our modern day dogs are descendant from a particular species of wolf We think probably out of Asia, maybe Eastern Europe. It kind of depends on who you talk to, but there are people doing genetic studies and fossil record studies and all kinds of things, trying to figure out exactly when dogs and people started to hang out. Now in North America, today we still have wolves. And actually in Asia, Europe, and believe it or not, in a couple places in Africa, there's still wolves, or at least wild dogs. And they usually top out about the same size. So a good sized, Arctic wolf will get to be about 3 feet high at the shoulder and up to around 150 pounds, give or take. That's a pretty good, pretty hefty wolf. The Arctic wolves get a little bigger because it's cold up there, and the extra size helps to keep them warm. Real thick fur. But we have gray wolves, Arctic wolves, and timber wolves in North America. And it's that the biggest ones are comparable to a big dog. Now, back in the Ice Age, we had a really neat species of wolf that just didn't make it past that last glacial maximum, called the dire wolf. Now, this is a dire wolf skull. Now, these animals were predators. Look at those teeth. So the dire wolves in appearance would have looked fairly similar to a modern wolf. Now, of course, there's no ear bones on the skull, right? So they had their ears stick up off of the top like that. Their eyes in the front here. So just like a modern dog, if they look at the camera here, he could see you straight ahead. Good sense of smell, big snout, really strong jaws, really thick, tough bones, really thick, tough teeth. And a feature of all of the predators that we're going to look at here is this right here. Now, all of you guys watching me, I want you to take your fingers and feel the top of your head. Tell me, does anybody have a bony crest on top of their head? Anybody? Oh, this guy does. There's always somebody that says, I do. Now, this is what we call a sagittal crest, and it is muscle attachment. This is where the jaw muscles of this animal attach to the skull. And modern wolves, wolverines, weasels, otters, bears, raccoons, all these modern animals have this. It's a very common adaptation. But the bigger and the more developed that crest is, the stronger the bite. And don't forget that. That's going to be important in a few minutes. Now, dire wolves, like I said, they're not with us anymore because they adapted to a very specific niche. And we think that they were primarily interested in hunting bison. And you remember we talked about bison earlier. We said herds up to the millions. Lots and lots of food for an animal like this. And this is a bison bone, and you can see it's a thick, heavy piece of bone. Their jaws, there we go, give Fido his bone. Their jaws were strong enough to crush those bones. But for our direwolf friend here, all of that came at a cost. This area of the skull here, this kind of round area, contained the brain. And one of the theories about why dire wolves didn't make it and modern wolves did is that those jaw muscles took up a bunch of space, and to make room in the head, the brain shrank. So they just weren't as smart as modern wolves. And so the modern wolves were able to outcompete them, and they were just better hunters. They were just smarter. So dire wolf didn't do his homework, maybe. Now, there's other theories about why they're not around. One of those theories is they got too specialized when the last glacial maximum ended and the environment changed, they couldn't keep up, and there just wasn't enough bison to go around. Of course, they were big, big animals. They were more than 3 feet high at the shoulder. They would have stood about this high on me, or table height. They weighed up to 250 pounds, double the size of a modern wolf. So they may have been too slow to catch smaller prey and couldn't keep themselves fed when the large animals got harder to find, or they might have just not been able to deal with the hot weather. After the ice age came to an end and it got warmer, they might have just been too big. But fortunately for us, they are not around anymore. Now, one critter that is around still, and right here in the state of Wisconsin, I've actually seen them walking out in the woods and camping. It's the North American black bear. Now, bears are a very successful and widespread animal. This is our North American black bear skull. And you can see it's a pretty good sized bear. A pretty good sized skull, rather. As bears go, they're kind of a medium-sized bear. Black bears, they stand about 6 feet tall, when they stand up on their hind legs. Some can get bigger, some, smaller, just like any animal, a little variation. The average is going to be between 300 and 400 pounds. In a zoo, or if you get what we call a garbage bear, where he gets into the trash cans and eats stuff, junk food that he wouldn't normally eat, they can get really big. I've heard of records more than 800 pounds, but that's a bear that really needs to go on a diet and get some exercise. Now, black bears, see, unlike our dire wolves, they have kind of smallish teeth. They've got that sagittal crest up here, but it's not as big, not as heavily developed. Of course, I wouldn't want to get bitten by a black bear. They're pretty tough. They're a bear, and they do eat meat, but they actually eat a lot of vegetable matter. They're what we call an omnivore. They eat plants, things like berries, roots, tubers. They eat a lot of bugs, believe it or not. They're very good at catching rodents and gophers and stuff like that. And of course, they'll eat calves, deer, bigger animals if they catch them. They'll scavenge, and they're very good at getting into garbage cans. Now, black bears, unlike most bears, they'll actually have litters of 3 or 4 at a time. So the black bear population can grow fairly quickly, where larger bears, things like grizzlies, usually don't have more than 2 cubs. So it takes more time for their population to grow. Now, a grizzly bear is a much bigger bear. They're about twice the size of a black bear. They get up around 1,000 pounds. They can stand around 8 feet tall when they get up on their hind legs. Their claws on their front feet, their digging and their fighting claws, are the size of my index finger or bigger. They're really impressive animals. And believe it or not, they can run more than 30 miles an hour. They're surprisingly fast, powerful predators. But like that black bear, they're not really interested in working hard for their food. They'll scavenge, they'll eat out of the garbage if they get the chance. They do a lot of digging. Grizzly bears in particular are really good at digging up prairie dogs. They really like berries and honey and sweet stuff like that. They eat roots and tubers, things like carrots and potatoes. And they eat a little bit more meat in their normal diet than say people do, but they're really true omnivores. Now, in Ice Age Europe, if anybody's heard of a book series or a movie called Clan of the Cave Bear, there was a bear called the Cave Bear that is kind of important to that story. But the cave bear is a relative of the grizzly bear. In Europe today, we have the European brown bear, which is very similar to the grizzly bear. It's just sort of the European version of a grizzly bear, about the same size, similar behavior, similar look, a couple different physical features, but a large bear. the European cave bear was about the size of a modern polar bear. It'd get up around 11 and a half feet tall when it stood on its hind legs. That's taller than the ceiling in the room that you're sitting in right now, unless you've got really tall ceilings. We think they could get up to 2,000, maybe 2,200 pounds. They were really hefty animals. Actually, just a few weeks ago, a paper and photos came out of somebody that found one that was actually frozen with all of the muscle and the fur and the skin, the organs. It was basically mummified by the ice. And so we know a lot about what these animals look like. And they look very similar to a modern bear. In fact, if you came across one in the modern world, you'd probably think it's a brown bear, just a really big brown bear. Now, their front teeth, if it went to bite you, are about that big, about the size of my thumb, and really deeply rooted in the jaw here. This is all root. This would have all been in the jawbone for that European cave bear. And that's built like that, rooted in there like that, because they had a really strong bite. But like our modern brown bears, like our modern grizzly bears, they also had chewing teeth. This is a molar. A chewing tooth from one of those European brown bear, cave bears. And from looking at little leftover bits of stuff in the teeth and actually taking and analyzing the chemicals that make up what the teeth are built with, the calciums, the enamels and stuff like that, we can actually get an idea of what these animals were eating. And well, the results are that cave bears were actually eating more plant material on average than a modern brown bear. So they were big, strong, hefty animals, and they certainly did eat some meat. But we think most of the time they just kind of ambled around and ate berries and tubers and maybe bugs and stuff like that, and weren't as, as big into meat as, well, our modern bears. This guy, on the other hand, this is the giant short-faced bear. This is Fluffy here, and Fluffy is the biggest bear ever. In fact, the giant short-faced bear is the largest carnivore to walk the earth since the end of the dinosaurs. These animals were massive. On his hind feet, this guy stood more than 12 feet tall. That's about tall enough to look a T-Rex in the eyes. They weighed well over 2,000 pounds. They had long legs. On all fours, they were 6 feet high at the shoulder. That's as tall as a modern riding horse. And they had an absolute bone-crushing bite. There's this sagittal crest up here, tells us how big the jaw muscles were. This animal's jaw muscles were as big as my leg muscles. Look at that bite. That's not a view that you want to see as a caveman, right? And what's more, these bears had longer legs proportionally than modern bears. They were fast, so he could run after you as fast as a car. Based on analysis, we think that at least some of these species of this type of bear are what we call a hypercarnivore, where so much of their diet was made up of meat, so little of it made up of plants, that we actually kind of have their own category. Modern hypercarnivores include animals like crocodiles or Komodo dragons, or, believe it or not, cats. Now, if anybody's got a cat at home, they're predators. They like to pounce on your feet and come after you. I know my mom's cat comes after me every time I visit. She likes my shoes. Now, this This is a really neat little skull. This is a skull of a clouded leopard. Now, a clouded leopard is a modern cat. Think like lions, tigers, jaguars, panthers, things like that are all, here, get the light better, there we go, are all what we'd see. Even your modern house cat is related to this guy. And he's got a well-developed sagittal crest for a good strong bite. But the really important defining feature, what's going to bring us to Esther back here, is these teeth. We call the clouded leopard the modern saber tooth. It has the longest canine teeth relative to body size of any modern cat. Now, these teeth, they're about 1.5 inches long. Clouded leopard is less than 50 pounds. It's smaller than your dog. They're really not a very big cat, well, unless you have a small dog. It's smaller than like a lab or a retriever. They're very, very effective predators. Now, behind us, I keep kind of gesturing back here. This is Esther. Now, Esther is the iconic Ice Age predator. This is the saber-toothed cat. Now, if I get back here next to Esther, if I was, get up on the chair here so you can see, if I stand next to Esther, she's chest high on me. She is a very impressive animal. It could weigh more than 500 pounds, half again the size of a modern lion. The saber teeth on some of these cats could be up to 11 inches long. This is next to a modern lion's canine tooth. And see if we can show this on the camera. They're really, really fine and hard to see, even in person. But the edge of this tooth is sharpened with serrations like a shark's tooth, just like a steak knife, for slicing through meat. And they're thin, side to side, thick front to back. They're shaped like knife blades. And Esther here has a powerful bite. She's got this huge sagittal crest, the long, super sharp serrated fangs. But some important features, you can see, adjust our camera just a little bit, you can see her back legs are short. Her back legs are actually shorter than my back legs. Her front legs are longer, which means her back legs have to move faster than her front legs when she runs, otherwise she'll trip. We don't actually think she was a very fast runner, but these front legs, this ridge on the shoulder blade, the thickness of the bone, all of these extra surface areas on these bones mean that Esther was really strong. She was a bodybuilder of a cat. And so with these really sharp fangs and really strong front legs, we can imagine Esther as being almost like a vampire cat. She was very sneaky, not very fast, and she ate big game, horses, buffalo, sloths, ground sloths, stuff like that. We think she would sneak up on them and was strong enough that when she pounced and grabbed a hold like your cat at home, unlike where your cat just kind of grabs on and kicks with its back feet and nibbles a little bit, we think Esther would grab a hold of whatever she wanted, sink those claws in, and throw it to the ground, and was actually strong enough to hold it in place while she took those fangs and used them like a vampire bite to bite at the neck. And we think that's how they made their kills. There are some theories out there, different theories on how that worked. Some folks think that they used them to separate the neck bones and to bite at the bellies and stuff like that. But for the most part today, we really think that you can imagine these as being essentially a vampire cat. Now, looks like I've actually gone a touch long here. It's a little after 2, so I hope everybody has enjoyed all of these fossils that I've been able to show you. Now next week, we're going to be talking about the age of humans, and we're going to really go over some of our ancestors and some more interesting predators. Now, before we finish this off, I want to make sure, does anybody have a question about anything we talked about? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I heard him say.
All right, how about you? What's your question?
Me?
Yeah.
Why do saber-toothed tigers have such big fangs?
Well, the saber teeth, what we call those big fangs, have actually evolved in a bunch of different animals over time. The first time they showed up was in a group of really, really neat animals that are older than the dinosaurs called gorgonapsids. More recently, before the cats, you've got this guy. It's Haplophaneus. And this, it looks kind of like a saber-toothed cat, but it's not related to a cat. It's a different animal. We think that these saber teeth evolve for a couple of reasons, depending on the animal. In some animals, it makes them look really impressive to the ladies, because animals are always trying to look impressive to other members of their species so that they can spread their genes, which is very important to evolution. But with cats in particular, like the saber-toothed cats, we think that it was an adaptation for feeding. Now, like a modern lion, for example, has a very strong bite, and its teeth, its fangs, what would be its saber teeth, they're kind of short. There we go. And they're actually kind of round. And that makes them really, really strong. So when a lion bites like a cow or a buffalo or a wildebeest or something like that, it can hold on to it while it struggles. It can crush bone and that sort of thing. Well, somewhere back there, we think the saber teeth had really good luck at biting at the neck, and the ones with longer teeth ate more. And when they ate more, they were healthier, they lived longer, they made more little baby saber teeth. And so over time, those teeth just kept evolving to get longer and longer, and it made it easier for them to eat. Now, at the end of that last glacial maximum, about 12,000 years ago, they all died off, right about the same time as the short-faced bears and the dire wolves. And we kind of think that has something to do with Esther here was really good at catching big animals, and those saber teeth made it easy so she could kill a bison or a moose or something big like that. But she couldn't catch mice and birds and rabbits and things that our modern cats were really good at catching. So when those big animals disappeared at the end of the last ice age, Esther didn't have enough to eat, and her and the saber-toothed cats couldn't use those big fangs on like a chicken, and so they disappeared.
Tell him thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Does anybody else have a question? Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us and hanging out with me this afternoon. Like I said, next week, we're going to talk about Age of Humans. We're going to see some really, really neat fossils of different groups of early, what we call hominids, actually our ancestors. It's a subject that I really enjoy personally. I hope you will too. So again, thanks for joining in, and I hope to see you all next week.